Well, good morning, everyone. And again, my name is Paul Niedermuller, and I'm going to walk you through the comprehensive annual financial report, and more importantly, our role as the external audit firm for Jefferson County Public Schools. I just want to remind the board that we work for the board, and this is an important communication going to the comprehensive annual financial report as well as the audit. We will open for any questions at the conclusion, but if you do have any ones that are clarifying, feel free to interrupt me as I kind of walk through this presentation. Just to get everybody up to speed, we have already presented this information to the Financial Oversight Committee in early December, as well as the Audit Committee just late, about 2 weeks ago, excuse me. So we went through all of their specific questions as we move through the comprehensive annual financial report, as well as other questions that they have as our role as the external auditing firm. Today, we're going to walk through, and starting on the next slide, sort of responsibilities. And your responsibility as Board of Education is very clear in order to put forth the mission, the vision in terms of internal controls, making sure that you're good financial stewards of the taxpayer dollars, and you're educating your students. So our responsibility, as outlined on this slide, is to review that information, evaluate those internal controls, and perform or audit procedures as prescribed by generally accepted auditing standards. And again, our audit is on a material basis. So again, it's all in reasonable respects as we look at your financial statements, meaning we don't look at every single transaction. We evaluate those and test those that we think those are appropriate in order to conclude from the external audit standpoint. And on the right, even though there's only 2 bullet points, these are very, very important aspects as your finance team and through your leadership as the Board of Education, making sure that they're all prepared and fair financial statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and that you've allocated the resources, the people, process, and systems in order to have proper internal controls, implementation, and design of those controls in order to keep the information in all material respects. If we go to the next slide, and Nicole, I don't know if we're going to go through the comprehensive annual financial report or if we're just going to go through the PowerPoint. I can give you specific page numbers, and maybe we can look at those in a little bit more detail if you so desire, but I will highlight those on the next slide. So this is what we were engaged to perform as part of our role, is auditing the financial statements, the comprehensive annual financial report, which is within your board packet. The second component is you are a recipient of federal funds, and the trigger for having this single audit is any expenditures in one calendar year, fiscal year in your case, over $750,000. So clearly the district had federal funds spent over that $750,000, so they were required to test 20% of those programs, and the programs that are to be tested are Title I and coronavirus relief funds. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in just a moment in terms of why I caption that as programs to be tested. And then finally, required communications. I talked about internal controls. If as the auditor, we say, gosh, there's some things that happened during the process that you need to evaluate and consider adapting additional internal controls, or your controls were not performing as designed, we would be required to come back to the board, as well as all the parties that we discussed earlier, the financial oversight and the audit committee, and communicate those. We also are required to communicate any type of things that happened as results of working with the district, and those are prescribed and discussed at the later part of our presentation. Going on to the next slide. The comprehensive annual financial report is broken out into these sections. Again, I will highlight the page numbers, and I've learned from doing Zoom calls is may not have a Rolodex, but I do have physical page numbers and PDF page numbers, because clearly those are different as it relates to the financial statement. So on physical page 13, if you have a physical copy in front of you, or PDF page 18, it starts with our audit opinion. And in that first paragraph, our audit opinion describes what we are opining on. And it's the various component units or opinion units talking about each major fund. So the general fund, the building fund, the capital projects fund, the debt service fund, as well as those governmental activities. and then all other information. The next two paragraphs going down on physical page 13, PDF page 18, describes those responsibilities that I had in the first slide of our audit responsibility as well as management's responsibility. On the top of physical page 14 and PDF page 19, it highlights our opinion, and it's unmodified in all material respects. So after we evaluated all this information in that first paragraph under page 13, we were able to issue an unmodified opinion in all material respects. And thank you, Nicole, for that quick pivot. So again, top of page there, you'll see that opinion. And again, that highlights an unmodified opinion. If you walk down, there's various other things that are described within your financial statements, and it kind of talks about our assurance over those other schedules that are behind the footnotes. Some of that information is audited in relation to the basic financial statements. Other information, such as the statistical and the introductory section, is considered unaudited information as described within our audit opinion. If you ever wanted to have a great understanding of a district and you were short on time, I would start on physical page 15, PDF page 20. And what this is management discussion and analysis. And it walks through what happened, what transpired during the current year. And it also provides a comparison to the previous year. So it highlights any changes within financial statements. Sorry, page 23. I'm one off. Thank you.
I was getting there, sorry.
That's all good.
There we go.
So this is where you have a comparative financial statement. So it shows what happened last year. Management describes some of those changes. And clearly with the COVID-19 impact, there were a lot of things that were different in fiscal year 2020 compared to 2019. It also has various factors surrounding capital projects, debt service, and other future forward-thinking items that would have an impact on the district into the subsequent years. PDF page 37, and if you're following at home, that would be physical page 32, is your summary of your statement of net position. This is your all-in assets. This is everything you own versus everything you owe, and culminated between the two is a net position. Now, why this is different, and this is only reflected once a year, is this is on a full accrual basis of accounting. So you will see all of your capital assets. You will always see pension liabilities, OPEB liabilities, all of those things that are recorded on a full accrual basis. So probably the biggest changes as relates to those fund level statements, those budgetary based statements, is those capital assets and those long-term liabilities, general obligation debt, pension obligations, etc. If you go to the on the bottom of the page, you'll see the total net position, and under that governmental activities column, and you'll see a deficit net position, meaning your liabilities were greater than your assets to the tune of $1.4 million. That is namely because of the pension obligation in the middle, about 2/3 of the way down, of $1.4 million, which again, as we've discussed in the past, that is your proportionate share of the school trust fund that is allocated to Jeffco based upon your employees' salaries as done by Colorado Paris. So again, your membership within that program. Breaking out the net position, and we talk about what those are categorized as, and you'll see your largest positive net position is net investment in capital assets. So what this represents is a total cumulative capital assets, which is highlighted up at $883 million, about 1/3 of the way down under that governmental activities, $883, $758, offset by the debt used to acquire those capital assets. So that represents $366 million as of June 30, 2020. All of those categories that are following the net investment in capital assets are captioned as restricted. And what restricted means in this vein is restricted outside of the governing body, outside of Jeffco Public Schools. So this would be restricted either by statute, by granting agencies, by the voters, etc. So that is monies that have to be spent on the purpose that was given to the district, the funds given to by those parties to the district. I'm going to move on to the next page is 38, or physical page 33. And this just describes the various activities, the changes that got you to the ending balance as of June 30th. And again, as a governmental entity, we always start with the most important aspect of our business. So if we were in a private business, maybe we would start with revenues. Governments start with expenses because that's the cost of providing services to our constituents. That's an important aspect, and you'll see your largest cost associated with that is your general instruction to the students of Jefferson County. And if you move to the right of those expenses, you will see the actual cost or the revenues associated with providing those services. So using the same category of general instruction, you charge roughly $25 million for services to provide that, as well as you receive $15 million of operating grants. And so if this was operated as a business, this would have a $300 million loss in providing general instruction. Now, again, how we come to a positive variance is the importance of the local property taxes as well as state equalization that are highlighted on the bottom of this page 38. So I just wanted to everybody to understand the importance and the services provided surrounding the instruction as well as the charges associated with that specific instruction. If we move to page 39 and 40, this is more information that you're probably more familiar with. These are by your fund level information, starting with the general fund, the debt service fund, the capital projects, etc. Now, remember I mentioned on the opinion, each major fund, these are captioned as major funds. So these are major because they are significant to the district, so they get a special attention from your auditors. You will see from a category of fund balance, that's the difference between the assets and liabilities. There is more connotations and descriptions related to that, and that is by design. It is clearly all of the information at the end has strings attached, and so all of those strings are captioned in those fund balance categories. The largest being restricted, and we talked about that on the statement of net position. These are restricted by external parties. TABOR, those debt service categories, those funds that you received in property taxes from your citizens that can only be utilized for debt service. One item I did want to point out on the general fund under the assigned to category is you will see school carry forward. So these are underspend from the various schools that are carried forward to the next year. So they have been accounted for in the school-based budget. And then the other category of subsequent year expenditures. What that means is in the 2021, the original budget adopted by the Board of Education in 2021 adopted a budget that had appropriations or expenditures that were greater than the revenue. And the amount of that was $15 million. Because you were anticipating at the original budget of spending $15 million more than you're receiving in, then you have to caption that fund balance or that carry forward balance as a separate category to make sure it's clear that that was what your utilization of that ending fund balance of $178 million into the future. If you go on to the next page, Nicole, or page 40, PDF, you will also see the other existing funds that are considered major, the building fund, capital projects, and the grants fund. You will see all of the categories of fund balance are considered to be restricted because those carry restricted category captions because the capital projects was a voter approved project that must be used on those approved projects, as well as the grants fund, again, from third parties. You receive funds that have to be only to be used within the guidelines established in that grant agreement. Page 39, excuse me, page 46. I can't even keep my physical or PDF pages straight. Page 46 is the budget for the general fund. Again, as you know, the board adopts the original budget, and this is outlined against the final budget, and then it is shown the actual expenditures that were incurred as to the district as of June 30th, and you'll see a positive variance as a result of the activity through June 30, 2020. One item that I wanted to highlight at the bottom of the pages, because these numbers do not agree to the general fund activities. And the reason for that is those on behalf payments that are made by Colorado or the state of Colorado to the Colorado Paris system. The total amount of that is $225 million as of June 30, 2020, and of which $12 million was attributed and associated with Jeffco Public Schools. Because you won't know that number until July 2020, and you already have adopted your budget, the district does a different basis of accounting to be able to reflect why the variances between the actual GAAP basis versus the budgetary basis. So I just wanted to highlight that in case there was any concern about the differences between those two schedules. But again, a positive variance on the budget for the general fund in the current period. Page 48 is the other fund that is required on the budgetary schedule, and that is the grants fund. And again, you will see $63 million was expended versus an appropriation, and that final amount of $93 million, which has a positive variance. Now, all of this stuff on all of these numbers have a story and how the information is gathered, how the district accounts for all of this information, and that starts on page 52 PDF and goes through 53 to 59. So if you're ever having trouble sleeping, you can read the 6 pages as a result of how the district accounts for. So each of those captions, it describes, how are investments captured? How are they valued? How are capital assets accounted for? How is debt accounted for? And all of that stuff is our job, is to make sure that the district is doing it under generally accepted accounting principles. So the district takes 6 pages in order to make sure it's very clear of how all that information is gathered on the financial numbers that we just went over. So that is described on PDF page 53 to 59. Moving along to PDF page 60 and 61, some of your bigger ticket items on the balance sheet, your cash and investments. That is as of June 30, 2020. This is where they are all housed in terms of funds and primary government versus the component units or the charter schools. On 61, it'll describe, the district describes in the notes what type of investments are currently held within those various funds. So you'll see the money market, CSAVE, various federal securities to get to that $644 million. PDF page 63 describes the transactions related to the capital assets and shows the activity that transpired between those long-term assets that we discussed earlier, mainly the $106 million that was put into play from a construction in progress, mainly as a result of the bond program, as well as the total amounts that have been invested within your property, plant, and equipment since the inception. Keeping in mind that all of this information that's described is on historical cost, because so clearly if a building was put into play 40 years ago, the value may be significantly different than what it cost at the time it was put into service in whatever period. Moved along to PDF page 68. This gives you more detail in terms of the debt obligations, and specifically the general obligation debt and the changes that happened between June 30, 19 and June 30, 2020, and the principal payments and the various amortization of those categories as described within the financial statements. If you're really having a lot of trouble sleeping, starting on page 70 to 82 is 12 pages of pension and OPEB disclosures surrounding the various assumptions and actuarial valuations that go within that, calculating that liability that we discussed on that statement of net position, that big number as a result of your proportionate share of your membership in Colorado Para. And PDF, and finally page PDF 85 and 86 and physical page 80 and 81. This gives you a little bit of a historical context in terms of your proportionate share of that liability. And you'll see as of June 30 in the second column down, or the second number down, from the caption of 2019, you will see almost $1.35 billion. And in 2018, it was 1.5 billion. And 2017, it was almost $3.3 million. Part of that significant change between 2017 and 2019 is the state's component and portion that they contribute on an annual basis of $225 million, and some of the funding changes that happened as a result of the passage of Senate Bill in 2018. At this point, I'm going to transition and get out of the financial statements and address some of the specific required communications that transpired as our work as your external auditing firm. And moving along into the next slide, again, we highlighted that we issued an unmodified opinion, a clean opinion in all material respects. So congratulations to the Board of Education as well as district management and staff for receiving a clean opinion for the year ended June 30, 2020. We did have one management letter comment. We talked about internal controls in the past, and we bucket things, and they all sound nasty and they all sound bad, but here's how they work. Material weakness is something that, either the district's control failed or they could fail that could lead to a material misstatement. I said our opinion is in all material respects, so that would be a big deal. That would be something that you didn't have the process, you didn't have the controls in order to get there. The next caption is significant deficiency. This is something that would not lead to a material adjustment, but something that warrants a discussion with the Board of Oversight in order to evaluate the internal control process. A management letter comment is one that's less severe than both of those two previously described, but is more of a best practice and something that should be on the radar in order to determine your financial statements are clearly not misleading. And one item that we did have is an adjustment within your internal service fund surrounding some prepaid activities and accounts payable. We did bring this and have discussion about a financial oversight committee as well as the audit committee, and we're also bringing this to the attention of the Board of Education. Although not required by any audit standard, we just wanted you to be aware that we did have one comment that we had from an internal control standpoint. Moving along to the next slide. And it's kind of a drum roll, please. We kind of hinted out the single audit update, and we said we're to be tested. Now we have gone through the Title I program, but we have not completed our work over the coronavirus relief funds. As you are aware, this is all part of the CARES Act, and the CARES Act was issued in March of 2020. And so after reviewing the various components, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is required to issue a compliance supplement. So if you think about our federal awards, we must test how the federal government wants us to test. And so that has not yet been issued as of today. So there was talk about that being available in November, as most recently it was going to be available on December 10th. And so until we get guidance from the federal government in terms of how to test those programs, we will not be able to complete our single audit report. So what does that mean from the Board of Education standpoint? We are presenting today the comprehensive annual financial report without that federal component, and we will be working on completing the single audit in probably the January, again, all dependent on the issuance of that compliance supplement, and hope to have that completed in the February 2021. Now, from a due date standpoint, the government, those are typically due 9 months after the fiscal year. They have given a 3-month extension. So technically this would not be due until June 30, 2021. Again, more to come on this. I don't have any additional updates, but I just wanted everybody to be aware of why it's different than previous years, because the district in the past has always put the single audit as part of the comprehensive annual financial report. And clearly that is not attached to this packet today. Moving along to the next slide, I talked about required communications. And again, the audit doesn't just get to the end and say, hey, everything's clean, everything's good. We're required, we had various discussions with management throughout the process, which we started in the spring of 2020. Accounting policies, estimates, and footnote disclosures. We went into detail, and if you recall on those pages, PDF pages 53 and 59, I said there's 6 pages of accounting policies. There's all of this information. My job is to make it easier for the Board of Education and tell you that we did not have any changes. The district did not implore any changes in those accounting policies from the previous year. So if you did have those changes, I would be required to describe those to you and the impact on your financial statements. So again, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Accounting estimates. I wish accounting was an exact science. I got fooled when I went into it. I wanted everything to be in a nice, neat box. Unfortunately, it's not. And some of those estimates that I talked about is that pension liability. We have 12 pages of estimates and also capital assets. And what do I mean by capital assets is you have a useful life of capital assets and you depreciate that under industry standards. But sometimes a building may last longer, it may last shorter than in terms of what your useful life was put into place, as two examples of significant accounting estimates that go within your financial statements. I think if you move down to the next caption, or excuse me, on that same slide, Nicole, I apologize. Difficulties encountered, and again, this is all very positive, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. We did not have any difficulties. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Even under a pandemic and a very difficult time, in order to gather information, not being able to be on site full time, we did not have any difficulties. Management provided all the information we requested as a result of performing the audit for the current year. We did have 2 adjustments, and those were all captioned with that management letter. And those adjustments were not material, but management elected to make those adjustments in the financial statement. So all of those adjustments have been reflected and are within the comprehensive annual financial report. Moving on to the next. Again, none is about as good as you're going to get from an auditor. Any disagreements, consultations, disclosures, or audit findings or issues. So the fact that all of those are in the none category are very positive for the Board of Education. I do want to remind you, we started the work in April. We were doing everything on a virtual basis. We did, starting in September. We started our work back in August. In September, we did go on site for 2 days a week to be able to gather the information, because it's difficult to be able to share everything on Exchange. So district was very accommodating, again, practicing all of the basis health and safety. So that helped us in terms of being able to complete our audit in a timely manner. The culmination of the report date of November 16th. At this point, I will stand for any specific questions from the Board of Education. And again, I appreciate all of the hard work by you as board and leading this oversight, as well as management through this very challenging 2020 audit.
Thank you, Mr. Niedermuller. Thank you for the detail, and particularly the page numbers so we can follow along. Always appreciated. Ms. Miller, would you like to start us off with the dialogue or any questions you have?
Sure. Thank you very much. I would like to have a shout out to whoever designed the cover of the CAFR. I think it was creative and thoughtful, especially in light of the experience and the walk that we all went through at the end of the year. And I really appreciate us keeping our responsibility to provide the learning for our children. I like the quote, "whatever it takes." So whoever designed that, that was very insightful, as well as encouraging and hopeful. And I just wanted to comment on that. I do have a couple questions. Paul, on page 7, we discussed the facility plan, capital plan, and then follow up again on page 27 in the bond fund. And I'd just like to know what type of audit that was done for the capital plan, please. If you could just kind of describe what you all.
Cutting out a bit there, Ms. Miller.
Mr. Niedermuller, were you able to hear Ms. Miller's question, or does she need to repeat it?
Okay, I think okay, I'll try this again. Sorry about that. Please let me know if it doesn't come through. On page 7, we discussed the facility plan, the master facility plan. And on page 27, we discuss it in the bond fund as well. So I was curious as to what type of financial audit or review you did of the capital plan.
Sure thing. And thank you for the question. Again, if you go back to our opinion, that capital projects fund, as you described, is a part of the major funds. And as our work over your financial statement audit, we do review the transactions within that fund on a financial statement basis. So again, making sure that you're complying with your internal controls surrounding the utilization of funds for capital projects. The evaluation of the estimates is a result of any capital projects put into place. Again, from an estimate standpoint, we evaluate the costs associated with those programs, making sure the retainage. And so those are some of the steps that we do as a result of performing work over that specific fund. Does that answer your question, or is that helpful in terms of our role over that specific fund?
Yeah, that's helpful. So you don't really evaluate a change of scope or evaluate any type of performance of the fund or of the program. Is that correct?
We do not evaluate performance specifically. This is a financial statement audit, so no.
Right. And so I guess I'm asking, when we passed the bond, voters said we have an oversight group of our capital asset committee, and we'll also get an independent audit. I'm just trying to figure out how we're tying that work to what we promised our voters and our bondholders.
I won't be able to comment specifically in terms of the ballot language. I know our role has been the same as a result of a financial statement audit, again, as required by various agencies, including Colorado Department of Education, as well as board oversight. But as specifically to the language in the bond document, I would probably have to defer that question to somebody else on the Jeffco team.